This Film is Lit, the podcast where we finally settle the score on one simple question. Is the book really better than the movie? I'm Brian, and I have a film degree, so I watch the movie, but don't read the book.
And I'm Katie. I have an English degree, so I do things the right way and read the book before we watch the movie.
So prepare to be wowed by our expertise and charm as we dissect all of your favorite film adaptations and decide if the silver screen or the written word did it better. So turn it up, settle in, and get ready for spoilers, because this film is lit. In the beginning, the universe was created. This has made a lot of people very angry and been widely regarded as a bad move. It's the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, and this film is lit. Hello and welcome back to This Film is Lit, the podcast where we talk about movies that are based on books. This episode, we're discussing The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. We switched it up on this one. I read it because I've read it previously. I've read most of the books previously. This time, in the prequel episode, I said I was going to try to read the first two. I ended up not being able to. And I also, after looking at it some more, the movie is basically based on the first book. So I just read the first book, which is titled The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. So there may be, throughout this, there will be times where I'm like, this may happen later, and I can't remember, or I think I do remember this happening later. Elements like that, there are certain things that, if you've read all the books recently and have a good memory of them, you might be yelling at me, no, that's from a later book. If so, I apologize. We're talking about the first book and the movie based upon it. So, and as we talked about in the prequel episode, also Douglas Adams, every time he told this story, which he did write a lot of the screenplay for this movie, he mixed things around, he changed things up. The Hitchhiker's Guide is a living document to some extent while he was alive. And even after, because one of the books that came out after that is part of this trilogy of five novels in one story, the increasingly inaccurately named Hitchhiker's Guide trilogy, because it kept getting more and more books. One of them wasn't even written by Douglas Adams. It was like inspired by a story written by Douglas Adams or something like that. Anyway, so there's lots of elements that move around between all the different versions of the story. So if there's something I don't know, then tell us about it and I'll correct it. So before we get started, if you have not read or seen the movie, which you should have, it's on Netflix, easy to watch, nice, tight hour and 40 minutes long. We're going to briefly summarize it. There will be spoilers. So let's get to Let Me Sum Up.
Let me explain. No, there is too much. Let me sum up.
Katie, I go first.
Yes.
Because I have the book, which means you don't listen.
It means I hold my ears.
You hold your ears and you don't listen. Arthur Dent wakes up on a Thursday like any other, only to realize that his house is about to be destroyed to make way for a new bypass. He attempts to stop the bulldozers before being spirited away by his longtime friend, Ford Prefect. Ford is actually an alien who just discovered that Earth is about to be destroyed to make way for a hyperspatial express route. Arthur and Forge hitchhike off the planet just in time as Earth is destroyed. They eventually make it onto the Heart of Gold spaceship, which is a special new spaceship stolen by President of the Galaxy Zaphod Beeblebrox and Trillian, Trisha McMillan of Earth, or Trisha McMillan, I guess, of Earth. Zaphod then takes them to the fabled planet-building planet of Magrathea, where he thinks he'll find a bunch of money somewhere on the surface because they're a very rich planet, because building planets was a very lucrative business. They've since disappeared, and this is sort of an ancient, mythical planet, and he thinks he'll find endless treasure there. They don't find any money, but they do encounter Slarty Bartfast, Arthur mainly encounters Slarty Bartfast, who explains that they're building a new Earth for the mice, who had the first Earth built as a supercomputer to calculate the ultimate question that goes along with the ultimate answer provided by the computer Deep Thought to life, the universe, and everything. Earth was mere minutes from producing the question when it was destroyed, so the mice decided, instead of getting the whole new planet and waiting all of the time for it to come up with the answer or the question again, that they will just take Arthur's brain. They think it will provide them with the question because he was part of Earth up until the moment where it was destroyed. As they're about to cut it out of him, alarms sound, our heroes make their escape, cops have shown up to arrest Zaphod for stealing the Heart of Gold, Marvin ends up saving the day, and our heroes decide to grab some lunch at the restaurant at the end of the universe. Katie, that was the book. What is the plot of The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, the film from 2005.
All right. Usually I write down my let me sum up. Since I'm doing the movie this time, I decided to try to do it the way that you do it.
I wrote mine down.
And just, like, wing it.
Yep.
So, this movie gets started, and Arthur Dent, played by Bilbo Baggins.
Martin Freeman.
Yeah. He is upset because his house is going to be torn down to make room for a highway?
Yeah, bypass, but yeah, a highway.
So he's laying in front of some construction equipment to try to stop them from demolishing his house, and then he is whisked away by his friend Ford Prefect, who says that the end of the world is imminent. And then Arthur is upset because he met this girl whose name was Trisha, and she was dressed as Charles Darwin, and she wanted to go to Madagascar, but he wasn't spontaneous enough, and she left with some other guy who was, like, flamboyant and kind of looked like a rock star.
Yep.
And he's mad that he didn't do enough of a good job shooting his shot with this girl. And then Ford Prefect is like, it doesn't even matter because the Earth is going to be destroyed, so we have to go, because it turns out that Ford is an alien and he's on Earth hitchhiking and writing the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. So they hitchhike. He has, like, a little ring that sends a beam up into the air, and they get on board this ship, but it turns out that they're not supposed to be on board the ship because it belongs to a race of
the Vogons.
The Vogons, the fish people. They're kind of like fishy.
They're the ones that are there to destroy the planet.
Yes, they're there to destroy the planet. So they get on board this ship, but they're not supposed to be there, and they get caught, and the Vogons read poetry to them, which is terrible.
You might need to pick up the pace of this summary just a bit.
Okay, all right. They get away somehow, and they end up on board this other ship, and lo and behold, there is the rock star-looking guy who turns out to be the president of the universe, and also the girl that Arthur was in love with, or wanted to bang. And then they do a bunch of stuff, and there is an answer to life in the universe, which is 42. But they're looking for the question, so they have to find this question. And there's some shenanigans that happen that I was a little fuzzy on. And then they go to try to find the question. But it turns out that Earth is like a fake planet that was built by these mice to try to find out what the question was. But now Earth is destroyed, so the mice want to take Arthur's brain, but they don't, because he smushes them with something.
Yeah.
And then everything ends up fine.
Yep. Yeah, the Vogons show up.
Yeah.
And they all...
And the sad robot
Marvin
saves the day. And then everything is fine, and Zooey Deschanel and Martin Freeman get to be together and gallivant around the universe, which is better than Madagascar.
Yep. That's pretty much it. That's pretty much the movie, roughly. So, that was your brief summary. Let's get into the game show portion and play Guess Who?
Who are you?
No one of consequence.
I must know.
Get used to disappointment.
Okay.
All right. I have 5 today. First one. She was slim, darkish, humanoid, with long waves of black hair, a full mouth, an odd little knob of a nose, and ridiculously brown eyes. With her red headscarf knotted in that particular way, and her long, flowing, silky brown dress, she looked vaguely Arabic.
Okay. Well, there is a lack of female characters in this
In the book as
movie. So I'm going to say that that's Trillian or Trisha. Does it matter? Does she have both names?
Yeah, it is Trillian.
Okay.
She's actually like the only female character in the book. Oh. They added one in the movie.
Yeah, there is like a side,
which we'll talk about.
Side character in the movie.
She's very underdeveloped in the film. But yeah, Trillian. That was Trillian.
So vaguely Arabic with her head
She
scarf.
looked, because she had a scarf on and stuff like that.
Okay.
Yeah. This was written in 1980 something, so 1986 I
Fair
think we
enough.
talked about it. So, not a, it's yeah, it has its moments where it's not, the world's most sensitive thing. But anyways, next one. He was about 30 as well, tall, dark-haired, and never quite at ease with himself. The thing that used to worry him most was the fact that people always used to ask him what he was looking so worried about. He worked in local radio, which he always used to tell his friends was a lot more interesting than they probably thought. It was, too. Most of his friends worked in advertising. Shots fired at me.
Okay, so initially I was thinking maybe Ford because you said tall and dark hair, but then the worried thing made me think that's probably Arthur Dent.
That is, in fact, Arthur Dent. Yes, Martin Freeman is not particularly tall.
Not particularly.
But apart from that, the dark hair. And that's why I included this, the looking worried. I thought that helped to give it away a little more. And then he works in radio. I thought was interesting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
right.
They don't say what he does in the movie.
No, it doesn't come up in the movie.
Not important, I guess.
No. Next one. He was roughly humanoid in appearance, except for the extra head and third arm. His fair, tousled hair stuck out in random directions, his blue eyes glinted with something completely unidentifiable, and his chins were almost always unshaven.
Okay, so there is one character who has another head. He's got two heads, and that is Zaphod, or is it Zaphod? Zaphod Beeblebrox.
Yeah. Correct. 3 for 3.
Nice.
I should have said beforehand, these are all incredibly easy because they're pretty distinctive, and the ones that aren't super distinctive, like Trillian, she's the only woman. So, all right, next one. He was not conspicuously tall. His features were striking, but not conspicuously handsome. His hair was wiry and gingerish and brushed backward from the temples. His skin seemed to be pulled backward from the nose. There was something very slightly odd about him, but it was difficult to say what it was. Perhaps it was that his eyes didn't seem to blink often enough, or perhaps it was that he smiled slightly too broadly and gave people the unnerving impression he was about to go for their neck.
I don't remember the name of the guy who was building the planets.
That is Slarty Bartfast.
Slarty Bartfast, because I feel like that could maybe be him. Or it could be that guy who turned out to be like part robot.
John Malkovich's character.
Yeah.
Humma is his name.
Although, okay, so you said he was gingery, and Ford Prefect is not gingery in the movie. True. But the description does kind of sound like he's trying to blend in as a human, maybe. So I'm going to guess it's Ford.
That is correct.
Nice.
Now, he is not a ginger in the movie. He's played by Mos Def, or Yasim Bey, I think, as he goes by now. The thing that I think kind of gives it away is the perhaps his eyes didn't blink, or perhaps it was that his eyes didn't seem to blink often enough, or that he was smiling slightly too broadly and gave people the unnerving impression he was about to go for their neck. Yeah. Like you said, it does kind of feel like somebody, like an alien trying to blend in amongst humans, and his skin is pulled slightly
not quite getting it right.
Yeah, which sums up Ford pretty well. Finally, the last one. So you're 4 for 4 so far. Nice. He was tallish, elderly, and dressed in a single long gray robe. When he turned, his face was thin and distinguished, careworn but not unkind. The sort of face you would happily bank with. Okay, that I'm gonna guess is Slarty Bartfast. Slarty Bartfast. Slarty Bartfast. Yes, played by Bill Nighy. Yes, in the film. Yes, that is, and that one's pretty much spot on to what he looks like in the movie. Yeah, tall, elderly, single long gray robe. I think it might be more brownish in him, but close enough. He does have a thin, distinguished face. Mm-hmm. Bill Nighy does. So yeah, pretty much spot on. All right, that was Guess Who. 5 for 5. Like I said, they're relatively easy. I had a couple more I could have added, but I just went with 5. So good job. We're going to move on to your questions about, was that in the book?
Nicholas Flamel is the only known maker of the Philosopher's Stone.
The what?
Honestly, don't you two read?
I tried my best to suss out things that I thought they might have added or changed.
Mm-hmm. And And now, keep in mind, we don't know what of things that are added or changed were done by Douglas Adams versus the other writer who came on and wrote on the movie. So we'll.
And it's possible, like we said, that there's stuff that happens or is featured in other books that we don't know about.
That we'll see.
Okay.
And some of those I do know about, but we'll talk about it.
Are dolphins the second smartest creature on Earth?
Yes, they are. In the book, pretty much any time a narrator speaks, it's something verbatim from the novel. Pretty much. We'll talk about it. So dolphins are the second smartest creature on Earth. It goes mice first. They're not actually mice, though. They're pan-dimensional, super intelligent beings that manifest as mice in our universe.
Okay.
And then it goes dolphins, and then humans. So that's kind of how the book and the movie describe it. Although I don't know if the movie ever identifies the mice as they say the dolphin are the second smartest creature, but I don't know if they ever go back and explain that it was the mice that are the smartest creature.
I don't think they did.
They do a little bit at times because they say that they were Slarty Bartfast explains they were doing experiments on humans and that sort of thing. But anyways, yeah, so that is exactly the same, and it is mice that are not mice. They're pan-dimensional, super intelligent beings.
Does Ford Prefect try to shake hands with a car because he thinks they're the dominant life form on Earth?
He doesn't try to shake hands with a car in the book, but this is where his name comes from, is this confusion that he does in fact think that cars are the dominant life form on Earth when he's doing research. He's doing research when he's going to come to Earth. And I think this is actually in a later book because I couldn't find it in this one, but I remembered this. It's mentioned in this. It's like alluded to in the first book, but I think the actual explanation of it is from a later. I can't remember. Anyways, but he's doing research and he mistakes cars as the dominant life form. And so he chooses the name Ford Prefect to blend in. And Ford Prefect was a model of car in Britain at the time. Now, it kind of lands flat for American audiences because you don't know that Prefect was Ford made a Prefect and it's pretty much only sold in England or whatever.
Okay.
But it was in the 80s. It might have been in the US in the 80s too. I don't know.
Yeah.
I was born in 88, so it's possible that it was. But I'm pretty sure it was mainly an English or UK model.
Well, the name Prefect is a little bit of a tip off there.
Yes, very British. So that's kind of a reference to that in the movie.
Okay, all right.
That he does in fact think that they're the dominant life form. But by the time he's on Earth, he knows they're not. By the time the story happens, he's well aware that that's not the case.
Right.
So.
Does Arthur meet Trillian at a costume party, and is she dressed as Charles Darwin?
We don't see the party in the book, or we don't get much of a description of it. It's mentioned, and they do mention specifically. Arthur Dent mentions that he met her at a fancy dress, quote unquote, party. I took that to mean upon reading it, like that they were wearing like a black tie dinner type of thing. And not as costumes, but maybe that's a British thing, calling it like a costume party, a fancy dress party. Maybe that's like a colloquial.
And we have some British listeners. Yeah. We'd like to know.
So if that's a thing, that fancy dress party means like costume party in England, or maybe used to. I don't know. Because I took it as like black tie.
Black tie. That's how I would take it.
And again, we don't see it in this book. I think it does maybe get revisited in a later book, if I'm remembering correct. It's been 10 years since I read the first 4 of these books or whatever, but it might come back up, and there may be more details, but in the first book we don't. He just says I met her at a party.
All right. Does Ford have a little thumb ring that he uses for hitchhiking?
No, he does not. And I want to talk about this a little bit more later, but in the book it is described, the electronic thumb, which is described is, and this is quoting here, a short, squat black rod, smooth and matte, with a couple of flat switches and dials at one end. So
it's like just like a little remote kind of thing. Yeah,
kind
almost.
of. And he does have a similar looking item in the movie that I think is supposed to be the subsensomatic or whatever, which is another device he has that is what he senses the Vogons coming with. Oh. And that's a separate device in the book. He has a couple different things, but that's the description of the electronic thumb that you use to hitchhike and kind of teleport to ships or whatever. So a little bit different in the movie, and we'll talk. I have that in the segment. Some of these questions I have feelings on that we'll get to in later.
I'm familiar
segments.
with that.
Yeah.
All right. Is the Hitchhiker's Guide like an electronic database, or is it a regular book?
It is an electronic database.
Okay.
It looks pretty much as described. The movie version of it looks, in terms of like when they're opening it and looking at it, pretty much what I imagined when it's described in the book. It is an electronic device with a screen and the words "Don't Panic" printed on it. It looks similar to if you have the deluxe edition cover. That's kind of how it's described.
Okay.
But that's like a screen or whatever. If you have the Barnes & Noble collection, the Megadodo publications. Oh no, that's the people who published the Hitchhiker's Guide. Never mind, from the novel. But anyways, they have an illustration of it kind of on the back, and that is what I imagine and what the movie looks like. The reason is that it's police sound. The reason it's an electronic database and not a regular book is mentioned in the book, and I'm quoting here. In normal book form, an interstellar hitchhiker would require several inconveniently large buildings to carry it around if it was printed.
Yeah.
Because it has everything about everything. So
I was wondering, because I thought that might have been something that they did for the movie. Was
right, because it's very visual.
Yeah, more of a visual format.
Now, they do change that it like plays a little like animated video when it's describing.
Right.
In the book, it comes across more as just digital text, like he's just reading. It does read to you as well. It will say like the stuff, but I didn't get the vibe that it plays you like a little animated video about whatever you're learning, which is what the movie does, which I think makes sense for the film. So
okay, one of the Vogons keeps saying resistance is useless.
Yes.
When they're captured.
Yes. Yeah, this is a Vogon catchphrase, and it actually predated the Borg by a few years. Which
Okay,
the Borg,
that's what I was wondering.
The Borg in Star Trek TNG say resistance is futile. Turns out, so Douglas Adams was a big Doctor Who fan. He actually wrote quite a few Doctor Who episodes, was involved in it quite a bit. And in early episodes of Doctor Who, both the Cybermen and the Daleks have said resistance is useless before.
Okay.
So they think the idea is that he probably kind of just inspired and as an homage, a nod to that.
Yeah.
Like I said, he wrote Doctor Who episodes. This whole book feels very Doctor Who-y. They're on a ship. There are a bunch of people, and honestly, I think I read that Ford was essentially parts of the stories. Like Ford is basically the Doctor, kind of. To some extent, and then like this band of his companions travel around the galaxy, in this ship that can travel through space and time, kind of essentially.
And yarn.
And you have your humans with you. It's very much like a Doctor Who type of thing.
I had a similar thought about the movie too, because it looks kind of like a little bit like the way the costumes and the set pieces look.
Yeah, it's very much
a little higher budget, but it yeah.
And like I said, Douglas Adams worked on Doctor Who quite a bit. He was a big fan, a big part of it, of sort of British pop culture. So there are elements shared between the both of them quite a bit. So
okay. Does Trillian end up being on the spaceship that ultimately gets them off of the Vogon ship?
Yeah. It happens the same way in the book. She left the party with Zaphod, Beeblebrox, and has been traveling with him since then. Okay. We get more in the movie, or in the book. We get a little bit more of a description. She's there when... She's been with him for a while, and she's there when he steals the Heart of Gold, which is the spaceship. We actually see that chapter play out in the book where he goes to he's there for the unveiling of this new spaceship as president of the galaxy, and he gives his speech, and we see it a little bit in the movie, it's like a news story.
Yeah.
But we actually read a whole chapter about it, and she's there in the crowd, and he steals the ship with her, and they take it and go off. And he needed the ship to get to Magrathea.
Does he say he's kidnapping himself?
Yeah, I think he does. I can't remember. I'd have to look it up specifically, but but that's not the reason that they come after him. They come after him because he stole this spaceship. There's some jokes in the movie about their cops are after him because he kidnapped himself or whatever, and it's that's not really what they're after him because he stole this ship. That's
that makes more sense.
Super fancy spaceship.
Yeah.
So
okay. Is there a gloomy, big-headed robot?
Yes, Marvin is the manically depressed robot of the books, and his dialogue, pretty much all of it is verbatim. It's all word for word. I mean, not all of it is there, but pretty much everything he says is some version of lines from the book.
Okay.
So he's identical.
Cool. Does Zaphoid Beeblebrox have a head underneath his head?
He does not. Zaphod just has two heads next to each other.
Okay, yeah, because his head in the movie, like, comes up out of his neck.
That's not remotely how it's described in the book. I have this, I want to talk about this later, and because I kind of have split feelings on it.
Okay.
I'm of two minds about it, you could say.
Oh.
You could say.
Why would you do that?
But no, it is described in the book as him just having two heads next to each other that are always there. You know, it's not like one reveals itself. He just has two heads and a third arm, which the third arm he doesn't always have. He had that added. That's like an aftermarket edition, which we see the third arm once in the movie.
Like really briefly.
He slaps Martin Freeman with it, I think. But yeah, he just has a third arm that he had added on.
Does the probability drive turn them into yarn dolls?
No, it does not. I want to talk about the specific thing later.
Something that I really liked.
I know. I really enjoyed that too. What it does do is all sorts of silly nonsense. I'm going to read, because it's really confusing when you first read it. Mm-hmm. But I wanted to read a little bit of what the improbability drive does, or how it's described in the book, so that you can kind of compare it to what the movie does. Because in the movie, it like the ship turns into like random objects, and then like the yarn one is for instance, is probably the best one, where it, like the reality's all messed up. Here's what happens in the book, and now I get why they changed it for the movie, and we'll talk about it. This is right after they get launched into space, and then they get captured by not captured, they get picked up by the Heart of Gold, Arthur and Ford. Computer chattered to itself in alarm as it noticed an airlock open and close itself for no apparent reason. This was because Reason was in fact out to lunch. A hole had just appeared in the galaxy. It was exactly a nothing of a second long, a nothing of an inch wide, and quite a lot of millions of light years from end to end. As it closed up, lots of paper hats and party balloons fell out of it and drifted off through the universe. A team of 7 3-foot-high market analysts fell out of it and died, partly of asphyxiation and partly of surprise. 239,000 lightly fried eggs fell out of it too, materializing in a large wobbly heap on the famine-struck land of Pogril in the Panzel system. The whole Pogril tribe had died out from famine, except for one last man who died of cholesterol poisoning some weeks later. The nothing of a second for which the whole existed reverberated backward and forward through time in a most improbable fashion. 5 wild event maelstroms swirled in vicious storms of unreason and spewed up a pavement. On the pavement lay Ford Prefect and Arthur Dent, gulping like half-spent fish. "There you are," gasped Ford, scrabbling for a fingerhold on the pavement as he raced through the third reach of the unknown. "I told you I'd think of something." "Oh, sure," said Arthur, "sure. Bright idea of mine," said Ford, "to find a passing spaceship and get rescued by it." The real universe arched sickeningly away beneath them. Various pretend ones flitted silently by like mountain goats. Primal light exploded, splattering space-time as with goblets of jello. Time blossomed, matter shrank away. The highest prime number coalesced quietly in a corner and hid itself away forever. So it's it's kind of just nonsense.
Yeah.
When they use the improbability drive, it breaks the universe, kind of where they are within the ship.
Yeah.
Because it from what I understand, the engine makes the ship occupy all points in space in the universe / galaxy for a limited amount of time, which allows them to travel to different places. It's explained a little bit more later, and it's even more so in later books. They talk about it a bit more, but every time they use it, complete nonsense happens for while it's there, which we see several times throughout the course of the movie as well. I was a little disappointed in the movie at first. The first time when they just kind of turn into couches, I was like, all right. I mean, it's silly and fun, but it doesn't quite get across the like world-breaking nature of the way this spaceship works.
No, I was just mildly confused by that.
Yeah. But I think eventually with the whole yarn thing and some of that, what they do with it later, it works a little more. And it's a little more interesting than just like them turning into couches in the spaceship.
Yeah. The yarn thing is cool.
Yeah.
I get why they changed it. I think it would be a little hard to film.
I agree.
What you just read.
I completely agree that it's definitely one of those things that's budgetary, probably to some extent, of like, we can't do that. We can't have the universe turn inside and outside on itself and have millions of fried eggs and people materializing and falling into. Also, because it's just hard. This movie is already kind of hard to follow if you haven't read the book, and the book's kind of hard to follow. Like at times, like when you start reading that without realizing what's happening, because this is the introduction to some extent of the improbability drive. So you're like, what am I even reading? Like, what am I? And it takes a minute. And the book, I think, does a good job of it kind of walking you through, because as it's going on, they start hearing a voice that says, like, counting down, which the movie doesn't do, counting down the improbability. Like, it starts at, like, the odds of what are happening right now are like 8 trillion bajillion to 1. And then it starts dropping and the computer's reading it out and things get more and more normal as it sort of stabilizes and normalizes. And that comes up a little bit in the movie, but things are crazy bonkers and then kind of revert back to normality. And that's kind of how the drive works. But anyways, it's, yeah, that's what happens in the book. They don't turn into yarn dolls, though.
Oh, okay.
Not that specifically, at least.
All right. The sneeze religion of sneezing.
No, this is entirely new in this story, along with Humma, the guy who ran against Zaphod Beeblebrox. Now, they both may show up in later books that I cannot remember if that's the case, but they are not a part of the first book at all.
Okay, so then my next question, which is, does the creepy half-robot guy cut off one of Beeblebrox's heads to hold as hostage?
Yes. No.
Is not in the book.
And that does not happen in any capacity with any character.
Okay.
Like, there's not some stand-in for Hummer. Like, that whole storyline is just absent. Which is following up on your next thing here. Do they rescue Trillian from being eaten by filling out forms like at a DMV? No. A lot of the second act, the first act is almost identical to the book. The third act is similar without being identical. The second act, they add a lot of stuff that's completely new. Trillian never gets kidnapped or captured in the first book. Again, there may be elements of this in later books, but in the first book, she never gets captured. They never go to the Vogon home planet. They never go to the Sneeze religion place and talk to Humma. They never... the storyline with them getting a gun for Humma is not a thing. They the first time they use that drive after they get on the ship, the first time they use the improbability drive, they end up on Magrathea. Magrathea. It works. And they just... So, like, in the movie, they use it and they're like, oh, we're not here. Yeah, darn it. And
like,
then
bounce around a couple times.
Yeah. And they're... Well, I think just, once. But, yeah, they go, oh, shoot, we're not here. And then he's like, oh, I'm going to go talk to Humma, though. None of that's in the book. They just... They use it and they end up at Magrathea. And then it plays out similarly, kind of. Okay.
So, the point of view gun, then.
Yes. Not in the book.
Not in the book.
And again, not in this book. Maybe in later ones, but not in this book. And, I don't know if it is in later books. I do not know if it affects women or not. Okay. We'll talk about that later, though.
Yeah, I want to talk about that. Do the mice try to take Arthur's brain?
Yes, they do. They think... so they had this second Earth built, right?
Right.
But they decide, because the first one got destroyed, they decide that instead of waiting the 10 million years or whatever it's going to take for this new Earth to produce the question, they're thinking maybe they can shortcut that by just having using Arthur's brain, because he was on Earth up until like the moment it was destroyed. Right. He was part of the computer, so to speak. They think maybe the answer or the question is somewhere in him that they can just get it out. And they say the same thing in the book as in the movie, that they're not even worried if it's actually the real question. They just want a good enough question because they want to go on a media tour and make a bunch of money off of it, which is kind of alluded to. I don't know how well it comes across in the movie, but that is part of it. And so he just starts giving them random answers in the movie. And one of the random answers he gives them is one they come up with in the book, which is how many paths does a man walk down? Or how many paths must a man walk down? That's the question. And they're like, yeah, that'll work. And they come up with that after Arthur escapes. They're talking to themselves and they're like, that's a pretty good question. We'll just use that because it's vague and not too specific and it sounds good. But then they're like, yeah. And then they VoIP off to their universe or whatever.
All right.
Or their dimension.
All right. Do Arthur and Trillian have a love story?
Yes. No. Kind of. Okay. It's alluded to in the book. We get very little of it, at least in this first book. I want to talk about this a lot more shortly. It's one of my big kind of value or qualitative differences between the book and the movie. That I think is really interesting, and I do want to talk about it. And a lot of times adding a quote-unquote love story can be sort of a cheap Hollywood thing, but I don't think it is in this case. I think it's really interesting. And again, it's not really added. It's there in the book. Like it's just the first book is so short. It's 140 pages and it's super plot driven. We don't spend nearly as much time with any of the characters or their interactions. And again, I want to talk about that here shortly.
Okay. So. All right. My last question then in this segment is, does the robot save them by making all of the Vogons depressed?
Yes. Well, no, but yes. Marvin does in fact save the day by making something very depressed, but it's not Vogons, and we'll talk about it.
And he doesn't have a point of view gun, so that's not how that plays out.
It works differently, but it is similar.
Okay.
They kept the spirit of what happens there. Marvin does save the day by being a depressing, sad sack robot. That is what happens in the book. It just plays out very differently.
All right.
That was it for Was That in the Book. Let's move on to Lost in Adaptation.
Just show me the way to get out of here, and I'll be on my way.
Where is it lost?
Yes, and I want to get unlost as soon as possible.
I don't really anticipate an answer to this. I was just kind of curious. Does the book explain how the dolphins left Earth?
Not in this book.
Okay.
That whole chapter about the dolphins that we see at the beginning of this movie is a chapter kind of in the middle / end of this book, and it's, again, very similar kind of anytime the narrator talks, a lot of that's verbatim. But it is explained, and I found this on the Wikipedia for Hitchhiker's Guide. The dolphin, and this is quoted, the dolphin has developed a rather peculiar ability which exploits the plural nature of their galactic sector, not dissimilar to that evolved by the babblefish, which is this: in the picosecond before the inevitable calamity, dolphins instantly wink into existence in all of their possible probabilities in the whole sort of general mishmash. And the whole sort of general mishmash, the WSGMM, is a thing that comes up in later books, and it's sort of like... It's hard to describe without getting into specifically the details in that book, but it's just like a term for like the universe and like the multi-dimensional universe, so and like everything, the whole sort of general mismatch. Yeah. It's the wibbly wobbly, timey-wimey stuff. So they just kind of VoIP away.
Okay.
And the humans noticed in the movie, there's actually, I think you can see there's a newspaper that says the dolphins are disappear or whatever. But they don't fly away like they do in the movie. But that's part of the musical number sort of heightened reality
thing. I didn't think that was actually happening. I thought it was just the musical number.
They have some sort of evolutionary skill that allows them to teleport through probabilities.
Ugh, why would they stay here?
Because the fish. Thanks for all the fish. We gave them a lot of fish.
Yeah, but we also like give them plastic and shit.
Yeah, it's true.
And like make them live in SeaWorld. Anyway.
Yeah. But that is an answer, at least.
Yeah, it is. Okay. Trillian.
Yeah.
Trillian is human. So I was confused about, like, why she knows how to pilot the ship and, like, navigate the different things that are happening in the movie. Like, what is her deal?
Okay. So a couple things. One, she's super duper smart, and I don't think the movie really addresses this.
Yeah.
If they do, it would be during that first party sequence, and I just missed it.
I don't think they did.
In the book, it's mentioned that specifically that she has 2 advanced degrees. She has one in mathematics and one in astrophysics.
All right, fair enough.
Probably from like Oxford or something. So like she's brilliant. Also, and this is, I guess, kind of present in the movie, she's been with Zaphod for a little while. Like they've been traveling together for a while by the time we meet them.
That wasn't clear to me.
Yeah.
Okay, I felt like it hadn't been that long.
It's not been super long, but it's been at least, I would say, a few weeks. Or again, I'm probably maybe not necessarily enough time to be able to learn to pirate ship. It's never explicitly said how long it's been, but it's been a little while. It hasn't been like a day or two. They've kind of been traveling together. And we assume she kind of has learned some of this stuff along the way. And 3, again, she's just kind of casually a genius. She picks up all this stuff really quickly. And that's kind of the reason she left Earth. She explains in the book she was bored, and she says when she's explaining that she has 2 degrees, she says what is somebody with a mathematics degree and an astrophysics degree supposed to do? And I think she's talking to Arthur at this point at the party maybe, and she says, am I supposed to go do something, or am I supposed to just go and get in the get in the bank line on Monday or something like that. Basically implying that she's just like, this world's too boring for me. I'm too smart for this world, essentially, is kind of what it is. And she just wants to do something which is what they express in the movie. Like, she wants to go to Madagascar because she doesn't know that going to alien planets is a possibility until Zaphod shows up, and then she jumps at that opportunity. So
fair enough. Okay. So I got really confused.
I don't have great answers for this.
When they go through, they get to Magrathea and they go through a portal to get to Deep Thought. And I was confused by like the sequence of events, but I didn't really know what exactly to ask.
This is confusing to me too. And I don't think this is probably the movie's biggest flaw, maybe. So this doesn't happen in the book. When they get to Magrathea, they go down to the planet and they're looking for money. So first things first, Zaphod's not looking for the answer or the question.
He's just looking for
money because Magrathea is a planet that builds planets. That's what they do, which we see at one point. And they're like, it's described in the movie that it's like this ancient famed like El Dorado. Like they were this planet that built other planets for people, and it's disappeared thousands of years ago, hundreds of years ago, and nobody knows where it is and can't find it anymore. And Zaphod thinks if he finds it, that he'll find a bunch of money there because they were this super rich planet because they built planets for other people. And so he thinks he's just going to find a bunch of money. That's why he's doing it. And sort of the fame of finding the planet, but... So when they go down to Magrathea, they're looking for the money, and at one point, they go down into the planet, and they all get like gassed and taken prisoner by we don't see
like
who.
Knockout gas?
Yeah.
Okay.
And then Arthur, who stays on the surface with Marvin like he does in the movie, but they do that in the book. He does it to like keep guard. Basically, Zaphod just doesn't want him to come with him because Zaphod doesn't like him. And Arthur runs into Slarty Bartfast the same way kind of that he does in the movie. And in the book, this is the other thing. So Deep Thought wasn't built by Magratheans in the book, at least, which it seems like it was in the movie, which is confusing because it shouldn't be. So the people that built Deep Thought are the mice, the pan-dimensional sort of super intelligent species of people that built the Deep Thought were them, and not Magratheans. I'm not sure why Magrathea has a portal to the planet where Deep Thought is, or if it's supposed to be on Magrathea, because it shouldn't be. They don't ever go visit Deep Thought. They just go, and then they eventually run into Slarty Bartfast. Like I said, I think the movie kind of just slams this all together to hopefully make it less confusing, and I think ultimately makes it maybe more confusing.
Yeah.
We get recordings of what happened with Deep Thought in the book. Basically, Arthur gets explained all of this by Slarty Bartfast, basically plays him videos, kind of like what we see with... Zaphod plays at the beginning. But they don't ever go and visit Deep Thought because they don't need to go get the gun. There's no supposed gun where Deep Thought is. Like, none of that, all of that whole plot line with trying to get the gun from the planet or that sort of thing is not there. They just show up again looking for money. They don't find any. They learn all this information about Earth, and then the mice try to take Arthur's brain and they run away, and the book ends, basically.
Oh.
Essentially, kind of, that's what happens. So none of that happens, and I think it's a little confusing, and I don't really have an answer for if they're going to a different part of Magrathea where Deep Thought is, because, again, Deep Thought shouldn't probably be on Magrathea. It's like in another dimension, essentially, or whatever, or potentially. So, yeah, I don't know the answer to that. That's not what happens in the movie, or in the book. I do want to talk about it a little bit more at some points, but it's a little confusing. It was probably the thing I found most confusing, and I thought that maybe most people would find most confusing about the movie, which we'll talk about it.
All right, so then the mice are little people, and they vanish after Arthur smushes them.
Yeah.
But why?
Okay, so in the movie, we kept seeing those two little kids talking to Deep Thought, and they're like the priests of this civilization or whatever that are like the ones chosen to, which is kind of a thing in the book. It's very different in the book. We'll talk about it, but there's two people who are chosen to sort of commune with the computer and talk to the computer. And I assume, so that those are the mice. They become the mice and in our universe or whatever. And I assume the reason, or in our dimension, I assume the reason that they disappear after he smushes them is that they like VoIP back to their dimension. Because again, they're like interdimensional, super intelligent beings. Although in the movie, I also think it's weird because they're kind of implied to be Magratheans. which is not the case in the book, and so that makes it a little more confusing about what they're doing, because Slarty Bartfast is a Magrathian. He's just a dude, a humanoid kind of dude. The mice people they're mice. They don't turn into people in the book either. They just stay mice the whole time and just kind of disappear. Whenever they're in our dimension, they just represent it as mice. But in their dimension, they are kind of more like humans, it seems like. And we'll talk about it. It's confusing trying to explain these like weird differences. It's already it's the thing about the book is that it's already kind of hard to suss out all of everything going on in the book, because it is so sort of wibbly wobbly, like a lot of science babble, a lot of like, well, they're interdimensional mice that are represented in our universe as mice, and in their own universe they're very similar to humans, and it's like, but you don't ever get the details of like what planet they're from, or like what where exactly is Deep Thought. It's not important, so it's not really. Some of those little details aren't ever really given to us in the book because they're not really important.
Right.
So.
But then when we get into the movie, it makes it
a little confusing. Like, yeah.
Where are they? Where are they going?
Yeah.
Why are they going there?
Yeah, it is a little strange. And I think the movie does what it can with that. And if you can get past that, I think that's how the movie shines, but we'll talk about it. So that's it for Lost in Adaptation. Let's talk about what's better in the book.
You like to read?
Oh, yes. I love to read.
What do you like to read?
Everything.
All right, I have a lot of things here, but actually less than I thought. I have a lot in better in the movie in later segments, which was interesting. We'll get there. It's something. All right, better in the book. For one of the first things that I was disappointed that the movie didn't do is that in the book, Ford talks the foreman, the mustache guy, into laying down in front of the bulldozer in place of Arthur. One of the things that's mentioned in the movie or in the book is that Ford is slightly telepathic. Oh. And he basically like Jedi mind tricks the foreman into laying down where Arthur was, and then they leave. He doesn't like give everybody beer. He just like talks him into laying down. And the back and forth is pretty amusing, and like the foreman sort of the description of him as he's laying down and like what's going through his head, he's like it just sort of feels right now that he's laying down in the mud and like it covered in filth. He's like, this feels right. This feels like my job. Like that sort of thing, because he's this bureaucrat. He's this, and then you can sense throughout the book Douglas Adams's animosity towards anybody sort of part of the bureaucracy or sort of any sort of governmental figure to some extent. But I thought that's fun. Speaking of the foreman, there's a line in the book that I really enjoy. Is the foreman when there's this big back and forth between him and Arthur's like, well, I didn't know about this, and the foreman starts getting like, well, you should have known about it, and the foreman thinks to himself, quote, obviously somebody had been appallingly incompetent, and he hoped it wasn't him. Which I sort of love that. One of the biggest things that makes the book really good, and I talk about it in my final verdict, is the little lines of sort of how to describe it. I have it here. I think the novel, the thing that a lot of the things that I missed from the movie that the novel has is the sort of like brilliant little asides and observations about life and about people and about the nature of kind of things that are really succinct, but like really, you could just like, that's like a very clever sort of read on a situation, on people, on events that the movie has, and we get a lot of that through the narrator and stuff. But I think the book has so many of them, you obviously couldn't put all of it into the movie. And I think that's one of the things that I enjoy most about the book. And I have some more throughout here, but that's a lot of what these are like little lines and little moments in the book that are very clever and very biting. That just, they couldn't put all of it into the movie. So it's like, I get why it's not all there. Like you can't have you can't know, this line about the foreman sort of realizing somebody's been incompetent and hoping it wasn't him. It says a lot about, the type of person who's sort of a middle management type of person who's like, somebody fucked up. I hope it wasn't me. I don't, there's a lot of truth to that sentence, and I love the book for it, but I get why it's not in the movie. Yeah. So this is one I wish the narrator had said, because it's a famous line, is that when the Vogon ships show up, and this is a lot of the way Douglas Adams' prose works, is he describes things in a way that not many people would describe things, generally speaking. And one of those is when the ships show up, he describes them by saying that they hung in the sky in much the same way bricks don't. Because they're these giant, massive, rectangular ships that don't look like they should be able to fly, but they do. And another little line, this is a great line. This is, I don't remember the exact context of this. And I'm not going to do every line from the movie or from the book that I liked that didn't make it into the movie. He's talking to Arthur after they get on the Vogan ship, and he says, "Don't move." He added, as Arthur began to uncurl himself, "You'd better be prepared for the jump into hyperspace. It's unpleasantly like being drunk." "What's so unpleasant about being drunk?" "You ask a glass of water." It's a little turn of phrase there that's, just little things like that are just, as you're reading it, you just kind of chuckle to yourself like 8 times a page, and just like how clever it all is. And obviously you just can't get all of that into the movie. So, talked about the improbability drive and just how much nonsense it is. I love that. I imagined the Heart of Gold being much sleeker and cooler than it is, like the outside design of it. I imagined it looking like the ship from in one of the Star Wars prequels, the silver, like Princess Amidala's ship. I imagine it looking more like that, but it's kind of just a big round white ball in the movie, which it looks okay. I like elements of it, but I just imagined it to be cooler because it's like this super sleek spaceship.
One of the ships from Lilo and Stitch.
Oh, yeah. So I like Zaphod has in the book that he just has 2 heads all the time, but I do get why they changed it in the movie, and I do actually like some elements of it more, which we'll talk about. But I think they changed it because one of the main reasons is budgetary. Just they didn't want to have to constantly animate a second head or do like a practical puppet head or something the whole time. And I think the explanation they came up with for why he has the second head in the movie is kind of interesting and clever change on it. But I like in the book that he's just an alien with 2 heads. I just think it's cool. Although the book doesn't do a lot with it, to be fair, you never really know which head of his is taught. It's not like they have distinct personalities like they do in the movie. Whenever Zaphod has a line, it just says Zaphod says it. It's not like...
So it doesn't really
mean anything. Okay. There's some moments in the book where they talk about him doing certain things with the head, but like it's not particularly interesting. I don't think at least in the first book, the book doesn't do a lot with the fact that he has 2 heads all the time, so it's not super interesting. So in the book, it's not the Vogons that chase down our heroes. They don't chase the Heart of Gold. In the movie or in the book, it's just like generic cops, basically, like the government is after them. And I get why they made it the Vogons in the movie, because they're established villains already at the beginning, and they spent all that time doing all the character design and making all these puppets. They might as well use them. Like, I get it. And I don't hate that they're like, it's a little weird because they're like, the main reason in the book is like they are like the demolition and construction crew, basically. They're also a big part of the bureaucracy, so it's I can see both ways, but
it doesn't not make sense.
No, it doesn't not make sense. There's some brilliant analysis of Zaphod as a president in the book that I think is really really biting and interesting, and I mentioned it in the prequel. It felt very prescient, though, to some extent. And they play on this a lot in the movie. And one of the things that I thought was interesting is that he's doing like a George W. Bush, because this is 2004. He's doing that like like Texas accent. Oh, okay. Well, this is when Zaphod is elected president. It was for the sake of this day that he had first decided to run for the presidency, a decision that had sent shockwaves of astonishment through the Imperial Galaxy. Zaphod Beeblebrox, president? Not the Zaphod Beeblebrox, not the president. Many had seen it as clinching proof that the whole of known creation had finally gone bananas. Zaphod grinned and gave the boat an extra kick of speed. This is after he steals, or right before he steals the Heart of Gold. Zaphod Beeblebrox, adventurer, ex-hippie, good timer, crook? Quite possibly. Manic self-publicist, terribly bad at personal relationships, often thought to be completely out to lunch. President? No one had gone bananas. Not in that way, at least.
Oh, yeah.
Only 6 people in the entire galaxy understood the principle on which the galaxy was governed, and they knew that once Zaphod Beeblebrox had announced his intention to run as president, it was more or less a fait accompli. He was ideal presidency fodder. So, again, a little prescient at times, but pretty great stuff. And I also like Trillian musing on Zaphod and why he's so successful. Trillian suspected that the main reason he had such a wild and successful life was that he never really understood the significance of anything he did. Yeah. I'm not sure we needed Humma. He's not in the book at all, which is John Malkovich's character. The first book is a bit short, so I can see that maybe they needed this extra pit stop and extra like sort of plot elements to kind of round things out. I still don't know if he's necessary. He just kind of...
He's kind of like he's there and then he's not an element anymore.
Yeah, he doesn't show up the rest of the movie. The gun is only important because it's how they figure out how to write. It almost felt like he only is there to have them get this gun so that they can figure out a way to do the ending that's different than the way the book does it, because the way the book does it doesn't make sense with the Vogons chasing them, which we'll talk about. But I like this as a little element in the book that's fun, is that when they... And this happens in the movie, but it doesn't happen. The detail doesn't happen. When they're getting shot at by the missiles on Magrathea, the ship's trying to avoid the missiles and it can't. So they ask for manual controls. And the ship is so brand new that when the control panels pop open, like packing peanuts, and like the plastic is still on it and like flies everywhere. And I thought that would have been fun to see in the movie. It's like sort of like all the packaging like flying everywhere because none of it's ever been used before because the ship is brand new. Also, Computer Eddie sings during that missile sequence, which is... The computer's name is Eddie, played by Thomas Lennon.
Ship?
Yeah, on the Heart of Gold. The computer who talks and is like, like super cheerful the whole time. He's played by Thomas Lennon in the movie. I think he does a great job. But he in the sequence where they are trying not to get blown up by nuclear missiles that got launched from Magrathea, Eddie starts singing, like, just because he's this weird, cheerful, like, computer that's like obnoxious and everybody hates him and how cheerful he is. But he starts singing a song, and there's something I was really hoping that was going to be in the movie, this moment of them like all afraid they're going to die, and like this robot singing like a show tune over the top of it. I thought would be really interesting, but they don't end up having that in. It might have been a little bit too much noise because there's already a lot going on in that scene.
Yeah.
And I had this in better in the book, but it comes back, is that there's a wormhole appears and Arthur's words cause a war.
But it's in the credits.
But it's in the credits, and we'll talk about it. I had that in better in the book, though, because I was worried that we weren't going to get that. And I thought that's a very fun little moment. And the last thing I have for better in the book is there's a very biting cop critique in the book that the movie completely left out. Like, real good. Again, this is like 1986, which, again, not that the world was entirely different, but like it has
a little different.
And this is the cops show up, and this is the end of the film. After this is kind of the Vogons come in place of these guys kind of at the end here. These are just a couple random cops. They don't say what species they are or anything. Well, they do eventually, but it's a species we don't know anything about. So the cops show up. "We don't want to shoot you, Beeblebrox," shouted the figure. They hide, and then suddenly the air explodes with energy bolts as the cops both open fire on them simultaneously. "Hey, they're shooting at us," said Arthur, crouching in a tight ball. "I thought they said they didn't want to do that." "Yeah, I thought they said that," agreed Ford. Zaphod sticks his head up for a dangerous moment. "Hey, I thought you said you didn't want to shoot us." And then he ducked again. They waited. After a moment, a voice replied, "It isn't easy being a cop." "What did he say?" whispered Ford in astonishment. "He said it isn't easy being a cop." "Well, surely that's his problem, isn't it?" "I'd have thought so." Ford shouted out, "Hey, listen, I think we've got enough problems of our own having you shooting at us. So if you could avoid laying your problems on us as well, I think we'd all find it easier to cope." Another pause, and then the bullhorn again. "Now see here, guys," said the voice. "You're not dealing with any dumb 2-bit trigger-pumping morons with low hairlines, little piggy eyes, and no conversation. We're a couple of intelligent, caring guys that you'd probably quite like if you met us socially. I don't go around gratuitously shooting people and then bragging about it afterwards in seedy Space Ranger bars like some cops I could mention. I go around shooting people gratuitously and then I agonize about it afterwards for hours to my girlfriend. I write novels," chimed in the other cop, "though I haven't had any of them published yet, so I better warn you, I'm in a mean mood."
Wow.
right? That is like some pretty
Yeah.
intense. Oh, it's wild. Now listen to this, people rocks, and you better listen good. Why? Shouted back Zaphod. Because, shouted the cop, it's going to be very intelligent and quite interesting and humane. Now either you all give yourselves up now and let us beat you up a bit, though not very much of course, because we are firmly opposed to needless violence, or we blow up this entire planet and possibly one or two others we noticed on our way here. But that's crazy. You wouldn't do that. Oh, yes, we would, shouted the cop. Wouldn't we? He asked the other one. Oh, yes, we'd have to. No question, the other one called back. But why? Demanded Trillian. Because there are some things you have to do, even if you're an enlightened liberal cop who knows all about sensitivity and everything. I just don't believe these guys, muttered Ford, shaking his head. One cop shouted to the other, shall we shoot them again for a bit? Yeah, why not? And then they start shooting at them again.
Ooh, scathing.
It's pretty, it was like, I get why that's not in the movie. That's a line too far for most. That's an indictment, sort of a critique too far for most of your general audience. But I thought it was quite interesting and funny, for lack of a better word. But anyway, so I was disappointed that wasn't in the movie, but I can get why it wasn't in the movie. All right, that was it for Better in the Book. Let's go on to Better in the Movie.
My life has taught me one lesson, Hugo, and not the one I thought it would. Happy endings only happen in the movies.
All right, I love the opening song, Was So Long and Thanks for All the Fish. It's fun. That chapter comes towards the end of the book, and I love that it introduces us, and it says that they're the second most intelligent species, which is a bit of like a breadcrumb to like, well, then what's the most intelligent?
Yeah.
Because humans are the third. Okay. Because we're not sure who they're talking about, because they make it clear that humans are third, dolphins are second, so what's first? And then we find out later it's the mice. So I like that, because again, that comes way later in the book. And there's no song, and it's just basically the words, like everything the narrator says is the same, but there's no obviously no music or anything, as it's a book. I like introducing Arthur and Trillian meeting at the party early in the film, and I also like that Arthur talks about it early on. He mentions it in the book like once, but it's kind of just a throwaway line that he met this girl. But in the movie, they build it up a lot more, and I like actually seeing it and it's kind of seeing the beginning of their relationship. And this whole thing is built up. This love story is built up a lot more in the movie. I think this is a storyline that plays out more in later books. I think they touch on this more.
Yeah.
In the first book, it's very unrequited. Like, she just goes away with Zaphod, and Arthur kind of, you can tell he has a crush on her over the course of the book, but they don't ever talk about it. They don't ever do anything with it. It's never brought up. It's just sort of mentioned. Like, you can just tell kind of how they interact, that Arthur's like, likes her and wishes she wasn't with Zaphod, basically. But I really like where they go with that, and I'll talk about it a lot more in my final verdict. The ring on the thumb to hitchhike, which you mentioned earlier, I like that a lot. I think it makes sense.
Yeah.
I think it's a fun way to do it. That's not just because in the book it's just like a black rod, which, okay, like sure, but the thumb thing's clever, and I think it works. I love the dramatic pullback reveal of the giant spaceships right before Earth explodes, when it starts down on Arthur and Ford, and then it goes da, 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 and it goes up like a million miles into the sky. I thought it made me laugh, and I forgot about that in the movie. And I thought that was really cool. And I just love the way, and then everything goes silent, and then the Earth just like disappears. I love the way the guide looks when they show it like full screen, like the way the menu navigates and like the way the art plays out. I thought it's all really cool looking. Arthur serves a similar purpose in the movie that he does in the book, but he's a bit more real in the movie. He has a bit more to do, and he responds to things a little bit more like a real human being would. Like in the book, he's a little bit on the nose, like this like fish out of sea. He just never ever adapts. At least in the first book, he never gets around to sort of coming to terms with what's going on in any way whatsoever. He's just there. And Zaphod makes a joke about it at one point. He's like, Arthur's here to just say things like, what? And what's going on? And I don't understand. And Arthur goes, what? And he goes, exactly. But I think he's a much more sympathetic character in the movie than he is in the book. Part of that might just be Martin Freeman, but I really liked the slight changes they made to his character in the movie. I think he just feels more real and is a better, more identifiable protagonist than he is in the book. I like the bottom head. So we talked earlier about how I like like just the two-headed Zaphod, but I do like the way the movie does it, and I get why they did it for budgetary reasons of not having to animate a second head all the time. And I like it popping up for emphasis and to say the obnoxious things that Zaphod's more diplomatic head doesn't say, because, and he talks about this to Ford at one point. He says, "Oh, I had the second head installed or whatever because I had to split my brain because when I was running for president, I couldn't say everything I wanted to, and so I had to figure out a way to split it." Basically, kind of like, you know, take all the awful things he would normally say and all like the brash sort of part of him and push it down. Which, again, I think the only thing I don't like about that is it kind of undercuts some of the satire. At least currently, in our current political climate, I think the fact that Zaphod got elected as the brash, incompetent asshole that he is a better satire than him being this two-headed political, like, what he says on top isn't what he says underneath type of thing. Yeah. That's interesting, but it's also and is a good political satire in 2004, maybe more so than it is currently, potentially.
Yeah. No, I agree.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But I thought that was a clever fix for it, is to say like, oh, I split my personality up so that way I don't, I could get elected and that sort of thing. I like the lightsaber bread toaster. That's not in the book.
I've seen a gif of that, and I didn't know that this is what it's from.
She has like a little lightsaber. Trillian has a little lightsaber bread toaster. That's not in the book, or not in the first book, and it's fun. It's whatever. It's fine. I kind of like Deep Thought as a giant temple, and the species that are and the species that built it and sort of go to it, and are talking to Deep Thought as like this sort of ceremonial type of thing. In the book, it's just in a building on a desk, and it's just like a normal computer, and the people who go to talk to it are like accountants. These two they're like these two accountants. I get what the book is going for with that, but I also like visually, I think that what Deep Thought ends up being in the movie is fun and interesting, and I like the way they kind of visually display it. I think it would be a little less interesting the way the book describes it. So I like Zaphod trying to figure out what the question is for the fame and the money. In the book, he just wants to go to Magrathea because he thinks there'll be money there, like I mentioned. So I like that because he says in the movie, like, he wants not only the money, but also like it gives him a purpose of like, he wants to be the one who figures out this question, because not so much because he cares about the question, but because he'll be the person who figured out the question. It's for the fame, it's for the money, but it also ties in that storyline to him a little bit more, as opposed to it just being the secondary thing of like, well, also these species built these computers to figure out our characters are now tied into the whole Deep Thought. And
yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
I think it makes a lot of sense too, and it also adds a little extra level of like cool mythos of like, oh, everybody's been trying to find this question, and Zaphod thinks he can finally be the one to find the question, as opposed to he thinks he's gonna get to this planet and find a bunch of money, which he still thinks. I like that they don't change his motivation too much. He's still in it for the fame and the money. It's just slightly nudged over to not just finding a bunch of money. He wants to find the question so he can get the fame and the money. I like the yarn after the improbability drive. That's great. We talked about that. It's super clever and fun, and it's all practically done. It looks like it's like practical stop motion, like a yarn animation.
Yeah, like little puppets.
When that happened, I was like, this is delightful. I love this. Very good. They could have done more of that. I think they could have done a couple more of different versions of that would have been really cool. They don't really, but still, it's cool. I like that we get to visit Vogsphere, which is the Vogon planet, to rescue Trisha. None of that's in the book, the first book at least. So we don't get to see what Vogsphere looks like. They do have the little, we'll talk about, actually it's in the movie Nailed It here in a second, so I'll talk about that. But I like that we go there and see kind of what their planet's like.
Like, it's like just bureaucracy.
Yeah, and the little slapping things whenever you think too much. I already have an idea. I like that. I thought that was clever. I also like the thinking helmet where they juice Slim and then said it's stupid, but it's kind of funny. And you get to see Sam Rockwell be weird, which he does a great job in this movie. Everybody. I think, honestly, the weakest link in this movie, acting-wise, was probably Zooey Deschanel. There's some moments where I felt like I wasn't buying her. Other times she was great. The scene at the end with the gun I thought was really good, and we'll talk about it. But it's other elements of her performance, I was like, all right. I like Zaphod being the one who orders the Earth's destruction. This may be a revelation in later books that they figure this out. Seems likely, but in the first book, they don't ever figure out that it was Zaphod who was the one who like rubber stamped. Not that he orders it, but he just rubber stamps it without even thinking about it.
Signs it without reading it or whatever.
Yeah,
which
I like
makes sense.
Yeah, and like I said, I think that probably comes up in later books and they figure that out. But I also think Trillian in this one just gets a lot more emotional range and a lot more things to do in the book. She's just kind of along for the ride, or in the movie. She's just kind of along for the ride in the book for the most part. I mean, she does stuff and she's smart, but like she doesn't really have a lot of she doesn't do a lot in terms of like her doing something. And I like the scene at the end, or the moment at the end where she gets tired of all these men bickering about what to do and it's just like, fuck this, and goes into the portal. I really enjoyed that moment.
Yeah.
I also really love Arthur's reaction, and this is down to Martin Freeman, but when he gets into the planet building room, like his awe and the face he makes, like with his hand over his mouth, is just, I feel like it so perfectly captures sort of the emotion of seeing something that just insane. Like, I feel like he just, in that moment, just Martin Freeman just nails that reaction, because it's not just like, wow, it's like, he's like smiling, and like it's that thing of like when it's how I imagine like probably my face looked when watching like the eclipse last summer, like where you're just like, this is amazing, and I'm happy I got to experience this thing. Like that's kind of like what is on his face, and I just think he does a really great job with it. I also love that it's a little cart on an arm that goes all over the place. That's really cool. In the book, they're just like in a hovercraft, basically flying around, which are like a little spaceship type thing. I love the way the arms grab the cart and push it all over the place. I think is really cool. Also, so the point of view gun is interesting. I don't love the whole addition of that storyline with Humma and all. It doesn't seem super important or interesting, but I do like the gun, if for no other reason than the one scene where where the moment where Trillian gets it and she's shooting Zaphod with it, and he's like regurgitating all of her insecurities out loud to her. I think it's a really good scene, and the way I think she crushes it in that scene. I was just like, okay, like I don't love everything about this storyline, but I think that's a really clever way to have in a sci-fi to have an emotional sort of realization for a character, is to have somebody else, especially since it's Zaphod and he doesn't even understand what he's saying because he's not that emotionally deep to like understand anything, like her shooting him, and then the way just every time she does it on her face and he says something else that she doesn't want to admit to herself about herself is like really intense and good, and I just love this scene. But I also thought it was funny that it doesn't work on women because they're already empathetic and they can already see things from other people's point of views, unlike men, which, you know, I don't know if that's necessarily true, but I feel pretty empathetic. But
it's a lot to unpack.
Yeah. I also like that Arthur goes home, that Slarty Bartfast takes him to his home, and that's kind of where it plays out. That's not where it plays out in the book. They just go to like a room in the factory and they have a feast there. They don't go to Arthur's house. I thought that was... I also like it because it gives Arthur... The ending of this movie, as much as I'm sure it's controversial with how much they change for a lot of people who really like the book, I love that they give him they send him home and say... Because his whole arc, the whole movie is he doesn't take chances, and he goes through the same sort of routine of his life, and he just lives his normal, boring life, and he doesn't want to take any chances. And the movie takes him back home and gives him the opportunity to stay there and be in his home. And he, over the course of this movie and everything he's seen and the people he's talked to, decides against it. I think is really smart. And that's kind of what the book does, but it's just not as strong in the book. I also like that Arthur gives them an answer when the mice start interrogating him about the question, and he gets put on the spot, and he has this sort of, he just bears everything he's been thinking to them about Trillian and about his life. And he does not do that in the book. They basically say they want to take his brain, and he's like, oh no, I don't want you to take my brain. And then an alarm goes off because the cops are there, and everybody runs and they just get away. And he doesn't have to go through this moment where he's sitting there thinking he's about to die, and trying to come up with what is the question of life and kind of coming up with it, and it puts a lot of emotional growth onto him. And I love it as again, similar to Trillion's sort of moment of emotional realization. It's another good way for sci-fi to do that, I think, with a character where Arthur is sitting there with his brain it's silly and it's ridiculous, just like Trillion's, where he's sitting there in a chair with a metal thing on his head, and mice are trying to cut his brain out of his skull. And he has this emotional breakthrough. I think it's just, and again, Martin Freeman's great, and I think he does a great job with it, and I really like that scene. So we talked about it earlier. Marvin's suppression saves the day. The tweak to how they do it is pretty good, because what happens in the book is that the cops that show up are some species that can't breathe the air on the planet they're on. So they're in like suits. They're in basically space suits. And they just die. Our guys are pinned down being shot at. Our heroes are pinned down being shot at by the cops. And then all of a sudden it just stops, and they're like, what happened? Why did they stop? And they walk out, and the cops are dead. And they realize they suffocated, they asphyxiated. And they're like, what? And they look at the spacesuits, and they're like, these spacesuits are like, have a backup thing. There's like no way they should have, like, there's only way this could have happened is if their spaceship they came on like completely shut down or stopped working or something. And they're like, what happened? And so they get to the surface, and they're standing there, and Marvin is there. And the cop's spaceship had landed right next to their spaceship, and Marvin had been talking to the cop's spaceship, and it committed suicide.
Oh no. That's so dark.
It is, but I love it. It's so great. It's so great. But so I like that they kept the spirit of that it is Marvin's sort of manically depressed personality that saves the day. Because we could discuss the elements of that potentially problematic in terms of like depression as the thing that saves the day. Yeah, but like for the quirky funness of it, the movie keeps that moment where it is his, because he uses the gun to sort of transfer his emotional despair to everybody. And that's essentially what happens in the book. It's just he talks a spaceship into killing itself. He doesn't talk. He's not trying to. He's just talking to it. And because he's talking to it, the spaceship kills itself, and thus killing the cops. And thus Marvin saves the day. But last couple things. I like the movie's ending more. We discussed this.
Yeah.
I think it gives more closure. It's a more satisfying arc for Arthur, for Trillion.
Like it.
They don't really have character arcs in the first book. Now, again, and I'll talk about this a lot here very shortly in the final verdict, but comparing apples to apples, book one, or the Hitchhiker's Guide, the book, to the Hitchhiker's Guide, the movie, the character arcs are a lot stronger in the book or in the movie, and they have closure, and it feels better. I think it has more of an emotional punch than the book does.
You said the book was pretty plot driven, right?
It's very plot driven, and it's very clearly we're gonna do more in the next one, whereas this one isn't thinking about the next one potentially. And then the final thing in the movie I thought was fun is that when the ship jets off and it transforms into like 8 different things, the last thing it transforms into is Douglas Adams' face.
Yeah.
That's what that is. And then it says for Douglas at the end. So I thought that was a nice little touch. All right. Movie nailed it.
As I expected, practically perfect in every way.
A handful of things. The movie, I think, does a really good job of capturing a lot of the little elements of this movie or of the book that I really love. And I think anybody who likes this book a lot and doesn't like this movie, I'd be kind of astounded. I don't want to get into the whole journey I've gone over the course of doing this podcast and learning to accept the changes. We've discussed it a little bit, but I think if you go into this movie having read the books and loved the books, understanding that the changes are going to be made, I think this movie captures everything that the book is about pretty much perfectly, while adding and changing things in a way that just makes sense. But the things that it nailed that are in the book, I looked for this because it's a stupid little detail, but in the book it's described that Arthur's house has 4 windows on the front that perfectly fail to please the eye, and Arthur's house in the movie has 4 windows on the front that are kind of like awkwardly placed. So I was like, well done, you did it. Martin Freeman as Arthur Dent. I've talked about it, but he's great. He plays a really great put upon sort of everyman.
That's like his thing.
That's kind of his wheelhouse, is the put upon everyman, and he nails it in this one. There's little lines. Time is an illusion. Lunchtime doubly so. Something Ford says that's from the book. In the same place. Same as never could get the hang of Thursdays, which is a fun little line. I think Mos Def is a great Ford. He plays such a great, like, well-meaning but oblivious alien.
Yeah.
Like, he just does a great job of it. I think he's kind of the perfect Ford Prefect casting. I love the explanation of the guide and all the different little elements of when they're explaining what the guide is, because that's pretty much a lot of that's verbatim from the book. Like it's the most popular book series, surpassing the 3-part book series about God. And the last one, who is this God person anyways? It's got some great moments. They include this line, and this line's not actually in this book, and it's the one I used in the intro. In the beginning, the universe was created. This was widely seen as a terrible decision, or whatever the intro quote I said was. In the beginning, the universe was created. This has made a lot of people very angry and has been widely regarded as a bad move. That's actually not in the first book. That's that's the very first line of the second book, where they're like, he does like a sum up. He's like, it's called The Story So Far or something like that. Or that's like the first line, and then it goes into that part. But I was glad that they worked that into this movie, because it's a kind of an iconic line. It's an iconic line of Douglas Adams's. The Babelfish looks kind of exactly how I would imagine it reading the book, and it, you know, goes into your ear. And so in Doctor Who, the TARDIS translates everything for you in
this universe.
In this universe, you have to shove a giant or a little yellow fish into your brain, which I think is fun. I think the movie does a really great job of interspersing explanations from the guide the same way the book does, because that's a very similar thing the book does, is that it'll have a chapter of exposition of like what's happening in the story, and then it will introduce at the end of a chapter, it'll like introduce a new idea, and then the next little brief chapter will be an excerpt from the guide explaining that thing.
Yeah.
And the movie, I think, does a similarly good job of interspersing sections from the guide explaining what's going on. And that's a very similar experience to reading the book, which I think could be a tough thing to do, but I think the movie does it really well. So the jeweled crabs that the Vogons eat, that's a thing from the book that is explicitly mentioned. Those little jeweled crabs that we see crushed several times sort of as a running gag in the movie. Those are from the Vogue sphere, and they're which I will say this, none of the Vogons, from what I remember in the book, supposedly live on Vogue sphere anymore, which is kind of contradicts what happens in the movie a little bit. They basically just, because they all leave Vogue sphere, but they go back just to fish all the crabs out of it so they can eat them. But I also think the Vogons are kind of adequately gross and giant and awful and disgusting, as they should be. The poetry reading scene is great. It's kind of exactly how I imagined it, with the way they're strapped to the thing, and then he reads the exact poem from the book, the Lurgid Bee and all that stuff. The inside of the Heart of Gold, I wasn't a huge fan of the outside of the Heart of Gold design, but the inside is basically exactly what I imagined it to look like, which is kind of like an 80s sci-fi, like the TARDIS from the 80s or whatever, like, which is like buttons everywhere, but kind of like sleek, like the 80s, 70s, 80s idea of a sci-fi spaceship looks like on the inside, but kind of updated for a modern audience. Alan Rickman crushes it, as always, but specifically as Marvin the Depressed Robot, he does a wonderful job. He delivers all the lines adequately depressed. I like that they included the little detail of the cheerful doors. That's a thing in the book, that the Marvin is the depressed robot who's part of the ship. Eddie is the super cheerful computer, and then the doors and all the other parts of the ship have a sunny disposition to them, and they make cheerful sounds whenever they open, and it drives Marvin crazy. He hates them for it. I mentioned earlier, but Tom Lennon plays Eddie the computer, and I love it. He's so over the top, cheerful, and wonderful. They include a little joke that I found was really funny, where somebody says they're trying to find the question to the answer, and Arthur says, somebody says why. And they change who delivers it in the movie. Like, Zaphod does it in the movie. Arthur goes, why? And he goes, why? 42? See, it doesn't work. I already tried that one. Like, saying that why as the question doesn't make sense for the answer being 42. And it's a little throwaway that if you're not paying attention, you don't even get the joke. But it's from the book, and it made me laugh. The petunias and the whale, exactly like the everything the whale says as it falls is word for word from the chapter where that happens. That is exactly what happens. They hit the button, nothing happens. They stay in the same place except the missiles turn into a bowl of petunias and a whale, and the whale falls. And he literally says all the exact stuff. This is a complete record of its thought from the moment it began its life till the moment it ended it. What's happening, it thought. Or excuse me, who am I? Hello? Why am I here? What's my purpose in life? What do I mean by who am I? Calm down, get a grip now. Oh, this is an interesting sensation. What is it? It's sort of yawning, tingling sensation in my, well, I suppose I'd better start finding names for things if I want to make any headway in what, for the sake of what I shall call an argument, I shall call the world, so let's call it my stomach. Good. Oh, it's getting quite strong. And hey, what about this whistling, roaring sound going past when I'm suddenly going to call my head? Perhaps I can call that wind. Is that a good name? It'll do. Perhaps I can find a better name for it later when I found out what it's for. It must be very important because there certainly seems to be a hell of a lot of it. Hey, what's this thing? Let's call it a tail. Yeah. Tail, hey, I can really thrash it about pretty good, can't I? Wow, that feels great. Doesn't seem to achieve very much, but I'll probably find out what it's for later on. Now, have I built up any coherent picture of things yet? No? Never mind. Hey, this really is exciting. So much to find out about, so much to look forward to. I'm quite dizzy with anticipation. Or is it the wind? There really is a lot of that now, isn't there? And wow, hey, what's this thing suddenly coming toward me very fast? Very, very fast. So big and flat and round. It needs a big wide-sounding name like ow, ound, round, ground. That's it. That's a good name. Ground. I wonder if it will be friends with me. And the rest, after a sudden wet thud, was silence. I love that they, as much as they do change, they do keep so much identical to how it plays out in the book that if you're a fan of the book, I can't see hating the movie, but apparently people did. Slarty Bartfast's introduction, I thought was great. They keep in the line. He says, "What's your name?" Dent, Arthur Dent. "You'll be late, Dent Arthur Dent." "I'll be late to what?" And he goes, No. It's a threat. You'll be the late Dent Arthur Dent. The reveal of the planet building factory, the way they fly through the little opening and then it opens into this giant expanse, I think captures, because the line from the book is, after they fly through the opening, Arthur turns around and looks at the wall, and the wall defied the imagination, seduced it, and defeated it. Which is a great line to kind of express, the grandeur of the thing. They include the line about how Arthur says, and I mentioned this in a prequel, that he had the feeling that there's some big, horrible thing going on and nobody would ever tell him what it was. And Slarty Bartfast says, no, that's just normal paranoia. Everybody has that. It's great. And they do have a tease to the sequel that never got made, where Ford Prefect says, "I know this great restaurant at the end of the universe," which that's the sequel is the restaurant at the end of the universe. And they go and visit said restaurant, which is it's a fun book, but we didn't even get a sequel. So, and they put it in the wormhole and Arthur's words causing a war and then the aliens showing up. And because of a massive disregard for scale, end up getting eaten by a dog. It's a fun little aside that it's one chapter in the book that I was so excited when it showed up in the credits because it's delightful. That was it for the movie Nailed It. I have one quick odd and end I want to talk about.
I have two things that I want to mention.
Okay, let's do it. So the one thing I wanted to mention is, and I don't know, I would have to interview Edgar Wright, and maybe one day that would be delightful. But so one of the things Edgar Wright does in his films a lot, and if you watch any Edgar Wright movies, you'll notice this. And this is a thing from this book that I saw, and I was like, that's really interesting. And now I'm sure Edgar Wright wasn't the first person to do this. It's just how I most identify this filmmaking technique, because he does it a lot, and I love his movies, is the quick cut with snap zooms of mundane events happening quickly. So in like Shaun of the Dead or any of his movies, he'll do things where like somebody will get to they'll get home from work and they'll hang up their keys on the door, they'll take their coat off in the closet, they'll turn the tea kettle on, and they'll get a bag of chips out of the cabinet, and it'll all happen like bang, 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 bang. You know what I'm talking about? If you've seen an Edgar Wright movie, you know exactly what I'm talking about. He does it a lot. And in the very first chapter on the very first page of this book, as we're introduced to Arthur Dent, and I would actually have to look. This might be the exact sequence of events from one of the first Shaun of the Deads, because I know it. Okay, I just want to talk. So this is 8 o'clock Thursday morning. Arthur didn't feel very good. Toothpaste on the brush, scrub, shaving mirror pointed at the ceiling. He adjusted it. For a moment, it reflected a second bulldozer through the bathroom window. Properly adjusted, it reflected Arthur Dent's bristles. He shaved them off, washed, dried, and stomped off to the kitchen to find something pleasant to put in his mouth. And then the next sentence is just kettle, plug, fridge, milk, coffee, yawn. And then it goes on from there. And I would have to look. That might be the exact sequence of events at the beginning of Shaun of the Dead, because it ends with him walking through the door yawning.
Yeah.
And I wonder if that's not maybe where Edgar Wright kind of got that idea of doing those little things very quickly. Because those one-word description is basically the literary equivalent of the half-second shot
cut,
of...
Yeah.
And I was like, I saw that and I was like, now I have to go watch Shaun of the Dead and see. Because I know it ends with him yawning. I know it does. Because it happens at the beginning and the end of the movie. And I'm wondering, and if it isn't kettle, plug, whatever the other things I said. Anyways... Sorry, I thought that like blew my mind when I saw that, and I was like, did I just figure out where Edgar Wright came up with that? Anyways, what are your things before the final?
Okay, so Zooey Deschanel, is she ever a character other than a manic pixie dream girl?
Always.
Except for Elf, in which she plays opposite to a manic pixie dream elf.
Yeah.
But this movie was like, and I don't know if it translates, like if it is the same way in the book, like if she plays that kind of archetype.
She
because like he meets her and she's dressed as Charles Darwin and she gets mad because he won't go to Madagascar with her. And have you ever heard anything more manic pixie dream girl? Because I have not.
It very much is. The movie plays on that a lot, and it's one of the other sort of problems with it. But at the time, it was less known as a problem. It was 2004.
Yeah.
It was less of an obvious trope at the time, and like sort of a problematic trope, I think. And she is like that kind of in the book, to be fair. And this book was written in 1980, whatever. It's just not to the same extent that we see it in the movie, because she doesn't get as much to do in the book, and we don't learn as much about her in the book as we do in the movie. But yeah, she's definitely that character. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. All right. Now my other thing, I don't know if this was in the book or not, because I didn't ask about it. But at the end of the movie, Slarty Bart Fast says that they're going to go ahead and put the second Earth that they built up. And he says to Arthur, he says like, oh, we're just going to put it back the way it was unless you think there's anything we should like leave out or change or something. And he's basically just like, I'm going to leave.
Yeah.
If somebody asked me that, I'd be like, how much time do you have? Because I have a lot
with
of
a bullet,
thoughts.
Mosquitoes.
I have some suggestions.
Yeah. No, that's fair. But that's the point, though, is that Arthur he's not worried about Earth anymore. He's moving on to bigger, better things. But
I mean, I guess.
Yeah. No, you could have a list of things that could be left off this planet. All right, it's time for the final verdict.
Now, are you ready for your sentence?
Sentence? But there must be a verdict first.
Sentence first, verdict afterward.
I'm really split on this one. On one hand, the movie can never really capture the quote-unquote quirkiness of this book. If you haven't read it, at least the first one, it's very short. It's a quick read. And the genius of the novel is all of the asides, all of the observations that are super succinct and yet ring so true about life, the universe, and everything. The movie does its best to incorporate this, and it does it fairly well. With Stephen Fry as the narrator, it does a pretty good job of capturing the quirkiness, the clever, biting satire, the observations about the condition of life. But it can just never kind of capture all the little details of the writing in the book. That being said, I think the movie is a more satisfying overall narrative. The book just kind of ends without much of a resolution. I know this is intentional. Our adventures continue in later books. But we also don't get a lot of time with the characters in the book. It's very plot driven. It's a little mixture of character and plot driven, but it's very plot driven. They're just point A to point B, go, 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 go. Arthur doesn't get the same kind of arc over the course of the book. Trillian doesn't get nearly as much room to breathe as she does in the movie. Again, the problematic elements of the trope of her character.
Right.
Fair, yeah, I get that criticism, but she actually gets kind of more to do in the movie and room to breathe. We kind of just slam through the events and get a little tidbit of their personalities as things are happening to them in the book. The movie really pulls out the different elements of each character and kind of puts them on display. We get to see Arthur's inability to take risk. He leads a boring life. He misses out on opportunities because he's too scared to put himself out there. Trillian is brilliant and warm, but she has a lot of insecurities that kind of keep her from achieving happiness in her life. I think the book touches on these arcs a bit more over the course of the rest of the books. I can't assess that because I didn't read them all. I have read them, but it's been a long time and I don't remember. But this movie wasn't sure if there would be a sequel. We now know that unfortunately there wasn't and won't be a sequel. And the movie wanted to make sure that it had a satisfying narrative arc, and I think it succeeds at that. Just comparing one movie to one book, I think I have to give it to the movie in this case, as much as I love this book. And I know this is probably sacrilege to Douglas Adams fans. I get it. I think the movie has more of an emotional heart that the first book lacks. The book is fun, it's clever, it's satirically biting and wildly inventive, but I think the movie captures most of that while giving us just a little bit more, which is the heart. So,
all right. Potential controversy.
I think that might be a controversial opinion, potentially. And it wasn't where I was thinking I was going to land until we finished watching the movie and I thought about it for a while. But that's where I landed. So, all right, that is it for The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. Before we tell you what's coming up next time, you can do us the great favor of rating and reviewing us on anywhere you download our podcast. I don't think we're on Stitcher currently because there's an issue. I'm trying to fix it. If you used to listen to us on Stitcher, hopefully, obviously, if you're listening to this now, you found a new way to listen to us. If not, we're trying to get it fixed with Stitcher. It's an issue with our podcast client and why it's not updating on Stitcher. I'm working on it. But any other, if you can rate us and review us on any of the other platforms that you use and listen to us on, you can even rate and review us on Facebook if you want. Speaking of Facebook, you can follow us on all of the social media, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Goodreads, and we have a subreddit. And that's it. So, Katie, what's up next?
All right, coming up next, we are going to do something different than what we've been doing. We've been doing a lot of fantasy type properties.
Yes.
Coming up next, we are going to read and watch Crazy Rich Asians.
Oh, I don't know if I knew that.
Because I've been wanting to watch it because I heard the movie was really good. So I'm interested to see how it compares to the book, and it's not like a genre that I normally read.
What genre is it considered?
It's kind of like a rom-com.
Right.
I don't want to say trashy lit because I don't like that term.
Yeah.
But it's kind of in that oeuvre.
Gotcha. Okay. Interesting. It's always a fun surprise when I forget to look at the list or the schedule and I get like, oh, that's what we're doing next. Cool.
Yeah.
All right. Well, that will be in 2 weeks. In the meantime, we'll have a prequel next week. We also may talk about Endgame on that one because we're going to see that tomorrow night. And so I'm sure we'll have thoughts. But anyways. Keep that in mind. We might talk about Endgame on the prequel next week. So, until next time, guys, gals, non-binary, and everybody else,
keep reading books.
Keep watching movies. And keep being awesome.